I speak at this one? Okay. I'll ask for few words, preferably from close. So starting in 3, 2, 1. To prevent the level of confusion that was the semi-finals debacle, let's make this debate very clear from the very start. This is an active motion, meaning that you cannot argue on whether or not gun control and gun ownership is something negative, like inherently positive or negative. That is something that is dependent on whether or not the NRA as an actor should be the one pushing this messaging. The main messaging of NRA then has always been that the onus is on the person to control the gun and not on the gun itself to act as an instrument of violence or as an instrument of good. So I'll propose. At the top of this speech, let's do some accurate analysis on the NRA then. We tell you 3 things. Firstly is that they actively advocate for the ability to defend oneself with guns. That is the main push that they make for guns, is that they are to be used for self-defense, that they are to be used for recreational purposes such as hunting or for sport. We tell you that that is the main messaging that they're trying to push here, and there are even face contention from gun control groups that push that guns are more likely to be used for things like mass shootings or other forms of violence that place harm on other people. We tell you that secondly that they do want a high level of buy-in to prove that guns are not bad or that can be used for good, mainly firstly because they have an economical benefit. They're able to increase gun sales and increase the level of gun ownership, and secondly because it aligns with their principles as a movement. But then thirdly, we tell you that they are likely to be inclined to differentiate themselves from violent groups, people who start mass shootings and people who start school shootings. We tell you that this happens at a point at which it weakens their messaging and makes people less likely to go and buy guns from gun shops, or to less likely to support their movement if they are going to associate themselves, if they're going to not go out and actively differentiate themselves from people who use guns to commit violence. So how is gun control perceived in status quo then? We know this is the second piece of framing, that if there are people who die hard support gun control and there are people who die hard support gun ownership, that this debate isn't about them, because we think that whatever the NRA does likely won't sway them from one side to the other anyway. We know this debate is about the centrists, the people who don't necessarily have a fixed opinion on guns and that are actually looking to find out more, or B, to have any kind of messaging from movements before taking a hard stance. So secondly, on the trend and why the messaging is necessarily good, we tell you that there's a noted increase in holding parents accountable for negligence or that directly led to their child being able to access a gun and to commit violence. We tell you this happens because parents are directly responsible for many aspects of a child's life. They literally sign off on your health documents. They are responsible for making sure that you eat, sleep, and are fed well. They're responsible for your safety, your security, and everything that is associated in your life at the point at which you are a child. That means then that they have a responsibility to make sure that you're not able to access things that hurt yourself or others. And at the point at which that responsibility is violated, they then are rightfully held culpable for what has happened as a result of their irresponsibility. So what is this messaging likely to look like? We think that it's likely to look like the parents are responsible for the child's usage of guns if they are unable to store them in a place that is safe, or that they are unable to make sure that their child is in a state of mind where they are not being driven to use the guns in the first place. We tell you that parents we tell you that what the NRA showing support looks like is likely just being very vocal about it in their public advocacy and being very vocal about it on social media. For example, posting on Twitter or posting on Instagram about how they vehemently oppose, how they vehemently defend these parents being held accountable for their children committing these crimes. And we tell you that we also look at public advocacy. So they use this messaging in their movements to fight for pro-gun ownership. So what is this debate about? We tell you it's whether or not the NRA should use the messaging in the first place. So if opposition wants to run whether gun control is bad or good, because one, we tell you they lose because one, we tell you why the messaging is good, and two, because that's not what the debate is about regardless. Two arguments then, one on better advocacy for gun ownership, and two on how parents will become more responsible in handling guns in the long term. But before that, I'll take a point. Go. Okay, moving on. So the first argument on better advocacy for gun ownership. 3 layers to this. If I can group this to you, I show you how there's inherently more ideology consistent, better, and more robust messaging on the part of the NRA when they are using this. We tell you that it increases buy-in for 3 reasons. Firstly, what this messaging does is that it increases the responsibility on the gun owner and less on the gun itself that is used as an instrument of violence. Because the gun itself is inherently, they push the messaging that the gun itself is inherently value neutral, that it can be used for good, it can be used for self-defense, it can be used for recreational purposes like hunting. We know that as long as they push that and they actively condemn the usage of guns being for negatively, we know that gun access is inherently harmful on the child's part and is completely under the control of the parent. That means that the responsibility is on the parent to make sure that the gun is managed properly, and that means that there's a higher burden of responsibility on the parent as compared to the child. Even if opposition wants to tell you that these parents don't deserve to be held to such a high bar and to enter and to the federal court and be charged of such a high level of crime, we tell you that it's something that is necessary for there to be any impact on like reducing gun usage and being ideological consistent with the NRA's motives. Two impacts, and we tell you firstly on ideological differentiation. We tell you that when you publicly condemn people who commit mass shootings, that is already the point at which you benefit from being like a good gun movement. But then secondly, we tell you we can take this a step further when you condemn the people who are directly responsible for the children not being able to access these guns in the first place, and when you directly condemn them for failing to make sure that the gun is used in a safe and productive manner. That is the point at which they can differentiate themselves from people who believe that guns are only used for violence, they are only used for school shootings, and that is why you should ban them entirely. We tell you that they are able to sway people who don't necessarily buy into either side and are looking for either more opinions or that just aren't interested in or just that are interested to know more about guns in general. We tell you the second impact here is that it makes guns value neutral, because again, it places the onus on the person who is owning the gun to be responsible with what to do with the gun. Because the gun is just a gun. The gun cannot fire itself, it shoots and kills someone. It is the person wielding it that is shooting and killing the person that is like the situation is happening, right? So we tell you that that's the when you place the onus on the person, that's when you like win. But then secondly, on how parents become like more responsible in handling guns, right? This is a practical impact. Because what this looks like is that gun-owning parents who are likely pro-gun, if you own a gun in the first place, you're probably pro-gun, that the NRA publicly condemns unsafe handling of guns and promotes the punishment of their failure to do so. There's increased pressure on them to be safe about the guns. They're more likely to check in on their child's mental health. They're more likely to educate their children about gun safety, and they're more inclined to actually make sure that their children either A, don't access the guns, or B, are in the right mental state to use them, or C, are able to use the guns in a safe way to begin with. We know that impacts of this are twofold. Firstly, that's beneficial for the NRA because literally less shootings are going to happen if people are just more responsible about what they do with the child gun. And secondly, the impact is just literally that there are going to be mass shootings on a lesser scale if more people are going to be incentivized to be responsible about their guns, but there's increased pressure on them to hold the child, to make sure that the child is safe and not being able to access these guns. The comparative of opposition is very simple in that they have no ability to recognize this out. We can understand what the world on their side looks like if they're going to they as the NRA are going to actively condemn this message, because we think that's the only point at which there's any great delta established in this debate. If the NRA does not speak on guns at all, we think that is the point at which like the people are still probably going to ask for their stance, and the feminists will still not manifest on their side to the same extent. Go on.
Louder? Okay. Okay. In which case, just give me a. Sure. Prefer penalties usually with verbal POIs, please. There's no other option. I will ask for POIs, especially from the diagonal, but both backbenchers feel free to POI. I'll take like one or two. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Government forgot one important piece of framing. This debate occurs under the condition where kids are already educated about shootings in the first place to prevent gun violence in the first place, where parents are already keeping their revolvers in a case in the first place, but yet there are still shootings happening because kids have access to other means. Kids still have access towards these structures, and kids are still very ignorant of the things that are being taught to them as a result of hormonal imbalances or just being a teenager in general. We think at the point in which this framing is true on all sides, we think that the debate cannot and should not be about the end outcome of teaching these children about education, like the education of children and the lessening of shootings under this mechanism, where we tell you firstly on some meta comments that opposition side doesn't actually fulfill their burden as to why this sort of education and this sort of lessening of shooting is one that directly benefits the NRA in getting less gun control restrictions, but also on just a big question that still I'm very unclear about as to why their incentives are like back down to that. Because we think that all three of these incentives go back down to the one big question of trying to lessen restriction on guns. Okay, I'll go into my arguments a little bit, but before this, I want to deal with some things coming from the PF. First thing that they tell us is just that there's they find responsibility towards the parents via this sort of like messaging, right? And the first thing I want to point out is just that there's an analysis gap as to why public perception then would change insofar as to say that the CJS already creates like such an incentive, right? We can concede that parents are in fact probably will be held accountable, but we don't understand how this excess will occur. Moving on, second thing is just about this idea of the responsibility of the owner and bargain. Now, I don't quite understand this either. The first question we need to ask then about this responsibility of the owner and this condemnation is just whether this actually benefits the restriction. And we tell you that at the point in which that you are condemning the ownership and the owners of guns, then you are actively forwarding the cause of gun restriction in their incentive of trying to restrict the type of guns and the type of violence that occurs under this sort of ownership. We think that then holding parents responsible is a problem for all the reasons I'll give you in my arguments. The first thing that we want to point out is just that NRA has a big incentive to lessen gun restriction, or at least like stop the current trend of increasing restriction in gun ownership, right? And we think that our burden here is very simple, to just prove why we must fulfill that part of the incentive. We think that then, under our argument, we get a societal accountability issue. I think the problem is here. Well, accountability leads to restriction, right? We think that here, when parents are perceived as mature by legal and social means, they then are held accountable for the mishandling of these guns under the legal system. We think that then, where the legal system loses trust within parents as mature adults that can control the guns or control their kids from taking care of the guns, you realize then it's no longer a person problem because they are making these structures and they are taking methods in order to restrict these. You then realize it becomes a gun problem, right? Because if mature adults who are already trying can't solve the problem, then it comes down to a gun problem. And we think that this forwards this idea of gun restriction and allows policies on gun restriction to be passed easier the more of these things happen, right? The harm is just then that when adults aren't trusted and you have greater amount of gun restriction, the actor ends up being harmed where they aren't able to fulfill their incentive. Sure.
What on earth is a counter-narrative?
Okay. I don't know if you realize this, but we don't want accountability on the parents. We think that status quo is more than enough in the punishment of the children. We think that here, the teens should be held accountable within court systems, even if there's things like juvenile, even if they don't end up being punished at the end. We think that the messaging and the accountability that we need to put on the children who have these problems in the first place is probably much greater. Yes?
You notice that there's a trend, meaning that parents are still being held accountable on either side regardless. So what is the difference what's your difference?
Scale. If you're going to forward what the liberals say, then you're going to end up forwarding your cause even more. Note then, we want to observe two trends later. We think that here then, on two solutions, right? First is just more attention on children under this sort of messaging. We think that the legal system we think that this sort of messaging holds more children accountable under the clause that the NRA is already under a lot of public attention from the type of stances that they have on this particular matter. We think that then, by putting greater emphasis on the children, we are able to mechanize to you that the children are seen as a problem for two reasons. It's just firstly, that there's already a pre-existing social narrative that children are very naive and have no autonomy over their actions. It's just secondly, that if they are not punishable if they're already not punishable, right, we realize that it's just a child problem because they don't have the agency and autonomy to do these. We think all of these things point to children are terrible agents. And that's it. We don't think that then it mechanizes as a gun problem at the end of the day. It mechanizes as a child problem, in which case you realize, slightly for two reasons. So firstly, the type of social perception that exists, but also secondly, by media portrayal about these problems, where you see that the media is telling us, oh, this child has this background, they have these incentives. But we think that under these already pre-existing narratives, and also plus the messaging, we think that we are able to forward this idea even further. Secondly, it's just under the conservatism. Well, I want to observe two things. So just firstly, the liberal incentives right now is forwarding this idea of further youth advocacy and the further idea that they have some form of agency. Second thing is just that the conservative counter is the idea that is the incentive to want to lessen gun restrictions in states like Texas, right? We see that then, if you want to, if you advocate that parents are the problem, you are again furthering this idea that the youth are ones who should not be held accountable. Again, it is one towards the rights of children. We think that here you are actively taking a liberal stance of your opposition in those individuals who want to further gun restriction. We think that then having to make a conservative stance within society is also again something that will eventually affect public perception. We think that all of this is just to say that the public perception is one that is important in such a framing, insofar as to say that reducing the amount of gun restriction or at least mitigating the existing trends of restriction of guns is one that ends up benefiting our side at the end of the day. Come to the host.
Thank you, Leader of for that speech. I'd like to call upon the DPM.
Can I have a minute?
Yeah.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. What OO does is completely strip and fall about what the narrative is in modern day society. We know that there's already a growing belief that guns should be controlled by A, the increase in school shootings and the fact that guns are being misused, and B, as we shift to a more and more progressive society, the notion that guns are already out of date. What this does is prove that no matter what, right, there's still going to be a narrative and a prevalent one that children are not the ones responsible for the misuse of firearms. What the NRA does then is that they have an onus to either go along with this narrative or promote messaging that bans it entirely, and that is the messaging in which they lose. Because we tell you, if you go against the narrative that most of the general public is already supporting, that is where you don't get support and you don't get buy-in from a movement that already has waning support. What you should be doing is going along with public perception that was already ingrained and integrated into society and finding a way to still tie it to your movement's interests. Before I move on to one extension on how we are able to advocate for self-defense better, and I'm going to talk about how we get more buy-in into our movement, I think there's a few responses I have to make to OO, and after arguments I'll have a few PMs for CO. The main argument that they push to us from the beginning is that regardless of whether we have gun regulations, people are still having access to guns, and children can still get guns from other factors other than parents. We reject this premise, right? In the majority of gun misuse cases in America, the majority of the children gain firearms from access to their house, their relatives, and their parents. This is just simply empirically true. But if you want structural analysis, we say that children have very little access to firearms outside of their parents. Because where on earth are children supposed to get the guns? We can't say that children are going to go to black markets. Hello, you're a child. There is zero way you know about what a black market is, A, and B, how to talk to the person in order to get a gun, and 3, I don't think you can pay for a gun knowing that you are a child. What this means is that it doesn't, there's always going to be a narrative that children aren't going to be responsible by virtue of the fact that gun control, regulations exist. But see, even if it's not true that like children are not responsible, right? It doesn't matter if it's true that parents are already doing their best. What the NRA is doing is saying that parents were lax and irresponsible. Regardless of whether it's true or not, this is the messaging that we should push forward in order to bring focus away from the usage of guns, in order to bring focus away from the fact that people are going to say that firearms were the main problem. But secondly, and this will sting them, they miss the nuance of this debate entirely. When they say that when we condemn parents, and therefore when we condemn parents, we're going to condemn guns as well, we never condemn the ownership of guns. I think Michelle gave you extremely good analysis already about the kinds of messaging that we push forward. A, that we condemn the misuse of guns, and B, we support parents not exposing children to guns and keeping guns away from them, and C, we also support education of gun ownership and the fact that people should not be near guns when they're not mature enough. This message that we're pushing is different from guns should be banned entirely. What we're doing is saying that guns are able to be controlled if people took the proper steps. The problem is that people are not taking the proper steps right now. But 3, and this is their worst technical error, there's zero counter narrative. They talk about scale, but not here. When they're saying that, oh, if we don't do anything, then the NRA will have no control over the laws that are being passed. The NRA plays no role in the legal system nor in the messaging that's already carried out. The current message is that children are exposed to guns, not that they are responsible. And also that the lack of gun control is the problem. So note these two narratives. If we cannot get rid of the fact that people already think that children are irresponsibly exposed to guns, at least we can get rid of the fact that people think that lack of gun control is the problem. The moment in which we shift the onus to parents, we can shift it away from guns, and that is how we win. But 3, they also tell us that they concede that children are resistant to change, but yet they don't provide any incentive for parents to become more responsible to educate their child about guns. So I don't see why they will win on anything on their side of the house. But lastly and most crucially, they also say that they're going to push the problem that the child is responsible. And Kano, I want you to think about that sentence incredibly carefully. Their idea for gun control is to publicly say on Twitter that we think that children are idiots and they are the ones that are taking the guns from the innocent and like vulgar parents. Please note that A, you're not going to get buy-in because most people are mature enough to know that children are innocent. But B, you're not going to be able to gain like buy-in and support for the movement. On to one extension then. Before that, points. Preferably from CO. 3, 2, 1, okay, no. Okay, one extension then. How are we able to advocate for the ideologies we want, i.e. self-defense? Why is this true? Because our messaging is then phrased differently. The moment in which you distinguish yourself, you are able to do things like, instead of trying to refrain from condemning the public like misuse of gun control, you're able to publicly condemn it and be able to turn guns into like another form of something like a tool, or like being able to draw comparisons to other forms of weapons. Like for example, when knives are used in status quo, they provide they provide a functional use to people, and that is the way you can draw comparisons to, right? The impact here is that you're more likely to gain support for gun rights. And let's talk about this, right? What is the framing here? We tell you that people already want to use guns to defend themselves. Because of like this being called United States of America, people already know that people are going to have guns regardless of whether gun control is going to happen. So if I don't have guns, just because guns are being controlled does not mean that people have access to guns, guys. What this means is that people are already scared. They want to have guns, but they just don't do it because they're afraid of, they advocate for gun control because they're afraid of the safety of for themselves and the loved ones. But on the flip side, when we publicly condemn the misuse of guns and we support parents taking accountability and educating their child so that they don't shoot up schools, right? People have the assurance that they feel safe, and it's easier to believe that it's for self-defense. What this means is that you gain support of century viewers who are less likely to believe gun control messaging. Because no, the main premise of gun control messaging is telling people that guns are the problem and telling people that gun control activists are not doing anything to support it. The moment in which you, as a gun rights activist organization, publicly condemn the problem that people are most worried about, that is when people are more likely to buy into your movement. But on to preempts for CO then. They're likely going to say that you lose your followers because you advocate for things that they don't want. Firstly, you are the biggest gun control organization. If people want gun rights, they will still have to stick with you regardless. So we don't think that losing followers is a problem if they can't just go to any other organization. But B, we flip this by saying that, yeah, sure, even if you lose followers, you're going to get more support of the general public. The moment in which you assure people that if we have gun control, if we have gun rights, it's still going to be something that's regulated. The moment in which you The moment in which you actually advocate for things that people are scared about, the moment in which you actually blame the people, i.e. the parents, for like the misuse of guns and not the guns itself, that is the moment in which the NRA has the appropriate messaging for the movement that it wants to provide, and that is the moment in which OG takes a clear first.
Thank you, DPM, for that speech. I'd like to call upon Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
My speech in 3, 2, 1. Holding parents accountable for an act that they didn't commit in the first place is inherently against the message of the NRA, right? Trying to send that NRA is trying to send, right? When you support this trend, you further distance themselves from the main goal, which is the NRA is trying to lobby for, which is lessen gun control in the first place. I'm going to bring to you the main clash of today's debate, which is who better fulfills the incentive of the RNA, right? Firstly, what are the incentives of the RNA in the first place? Because I think it's been not been clear in the opening half of this debate. Firstly, they lobby against gun control and they want to gain more followers in order to pass policies, right? They support people buying these things and buying guns and holding themselves accountable for the gun they own, right? But what OG tells us is that guns, we should hold parents accountable for the guns, right? They send a message that these parents who have no control over their child in the first place should be stripped of the protection and the agency of holding the gun, right? For something they didn't do. As PM mentioned, it's someone holding the gun who is shooting the person, right? And it's not the parent, it is the child in the first place. You cannot take us at our best and characterize children as these mindless, insane beings who don't have a mind of their own and is only based on what their parents feed them, right? Because you understand that children still have a mind of their own and they're not entirely influenced by the parents themselves. They're influenced by the things they consume on an external basis, meaning there's things that are like television programs when they're taught in school, right? That we have to concede that parents can't control every aspect, every little thing that goes and influence their parents for their child's hormones in the first place, meaning that they should not be held accountable and be stripped of the basic right to protection in the first place on your side of the house. This sends a very bad message because you're telling the people and their current followers and the current follower base that they should be held accountable for a crime they did not commit in the first place. You're going to take us at our best case and tell us why children, these children who have external factors, the parents should still be held accountable in the first place, right? But secondly, why do we fulfill the NRA's incentives in the first place? And because the open OG didn't engage with us, and this is our counterfactual, right? Which is, has already been explained in my first speaker. OG losers. OG says that it doesn't matter if they lose out on their current following, but that's completely false, right? Because understand that you already consider that the current following is they have a huge following, a huge voter base in the first place, meaning that if you lose out on them and you send the wrong message, when you send a message and send an impression that they should be held accountable for something that they didn't even do in the first place, it means the conservatives, the people who have stuck for you for a long time, feel like they aren't being correctly represented on your side of the house and try to leave the movement in the first place because they're gonna think like, oh, these people, the NRA, is moving towards a more liberal, a different message, right? Meaning that they aren't going to waste their time and their money trying to lobby for this political party in the first place, meaning that they're going to take us at our best and engage why the voter base that you might gain, which is you haven't proved why you will gain these followers in the first place, is more important than the loyal followers that you have right now. That is, you consider is a very big voter base in the follower base in the first place, right? But secondly, let me process and analyze to you why we gain our goals, which is to pass more gun lobbying policies. Because we know on our side of the house, on your side of the done nothing and have already, as my first speaker said, there are already policies and like incentives for parents to care about their child in the first place, So I don't see why, why is it different on your side? But we say that if you try to hold parents accountable, we understand that the criminal justice system are the people who are trying to implement policies. But the thing is, once the criminal justice system realizes you paint parents as the main problem in the debate, right? So the criminal justice system are going to think that, oh, the parents are the problem, the parents are the people who are shooting people, right? In the first place, meaning that the criminal justice system will create more extreme policies to ban gun control. They will put their feet down and say that, oh, because rational adults can't even control like randomly shooting people, they're gonna implement more policies and further regress their policies and the things they're lobbying for. Yes.
Children are innocent. It's not what the NRA is saying, it's what the media, the articles and Twitter is saying. When a child shoots at the school, they say it's what you gotta do.
This is my third layer of speech on why we're better on the part where you say like, oh, like how, because your main benefit coming from government is that you say that, oh, parents will feel more responsible, they'll try to protect their child. But that's not true, right? Because we already told you that parents already done their best in that case. But how do we differ on outside house? We say that once we frame the children as the people who are shooting, we realize that the children are going to find the arms. What we're going to do is the society is going to realize that yes, it is the children's problem. They're not going to just think that, oh, the parents already done their job in educating their child. They're not going to be so naive. They're not going to think that, oh, because we already hold these parents accountable, children aren't going to go around shooting. But that's not the case, right? Even though the parents do try their best to push to educate their child, that's not going to work. So what's going to happen outside the house is that schools, the police stations, whatnot, they will pay more attention to the children, pay more attention to their child, and pass policies and do more checks and balances to ensure that their child, that their school, their living environment is one that is safe, right? They're not gonna just make assumptions and assume that like the parents have done a good job, because you have to consider that parents aren't like the best. The only form of protection that you can give to like stop a mass shooting, right? Schools can do more policies and pass more things to actually help prevent this at all. On your side of the house, your only check and balance is the parents, which is we already consider that. Everyone consider that it's not enough, right? So on our side of the house, we at least put more attention on the main problem, which is the child, and then we are able to push for the main message that we are able to prevent more like mass shootings and whatnot outside the house. So we wait over like the opening house in the opening house of the debate because number one, we already proved to you why it's not an incentive to like hold the parents accountable, because it goes against like all the things that have already been lobbied for in the first place. But secondly, we already told you how we still get better protection for like these shootings in the first place, and we don't need to go to extreme measures like putting a felony under their parents' belt or something that they didn't even do in the first place, right? I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Gianno, for your speech. To begin the closing half of the debate, I'd like to call upon a member of Crowd. Yes, yeah.
Am I audible at this volume? My speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Here, sign off is just trying to push the narrative where the whole reason people are violent is because of guns and naivety. They don't even see the damage they are causing. So before the debate actually begins, I think it's important that we touch on a few key layers of framing that were missed out on the opening half. So why do we support punishing parents? So we tell you that the parents are directly complicit if the kid shoots, right? It is intrinsically the parents' fault that the kid shoots. And not just because the parents don't take care of the gun and like keep it properly. We tell you that the parents do not bring out the child properly if the kid shoots. The parents do not provide the child proper education. They do not like teach their kids not to be violent, and the parents go out the way to show their own violent tendencies to their kids. So today my speech, I'll tackle one rebuttal from opposition, and then I'll provide one argument as well as my unique exception from where CD comes into this debate. So starting with my rebuttals, so firstly, on opening up, they say that children make the decision to shoot based on their own accord, right? And they tell us that parents cannot control everything. However, what we on CD told you is that something as big and as simple as non-violence and not resorting to violence and only using other measures to like sort something out should be taught, right? These children are heavily influenced by their parents, and they are likely to like take after them, right? Because the child is just a reflection of what the parents teach them. So I think OO doesn't understand how big a role parents play in this matter, because parents are responsible for the things they teach to the kid. If they teach the kid that violence is okay, or if they don't even provide any sort of moral compass to the kid, naturally the kid is just not going to be able to properly like rationalize, right? So on my arguments, so firstly, on why like children even get a gun. So we as the NRA propose using guns for things under the law, right? So we can't just go around like shooting people. But as a parent, it is your responsibility to take care of the firearm, right? Because if you expose it to your kids, it says more about you as a parent and your negligence as a parent, more than it says, oh, guns are bad. So parents who own these guns, they have the right to use them for self-defense, right? However, they are also responsible for the whereabouts of the gun. And if your child responds negatively by mindlessly shooting people, this is a reflection of how the parents take care of their kid. Keep in mind that a child is really, really impressionable, right? Especially at an early age, they just take after whatever their parents teach them, because that is what they've been exposed to since young. So if they see, as a child, right, if you see that your parents have violent tendencies, naturally you're going to pick up on it, right? Eventually, the more you are exposed to it, the more you start to think, oh, maybe it's not that bad. So if the dad's response to backlash is to go and beat his wife, the kid will naturally like harbor these like emotions of like being violent, right? He'll come to like think that, oh, violence is okay. So where does CD come into this game? We tell you that the gun is not the root cause of the problem, and the child is still going to find some violent way to get back at the people who upset him. So taking away the gun won't make the kid magically non-violent, right? We on CD tell you that it is because of the child's bad upbringing due to negligence on the parents' part that the kid is so violent. So on my second argument, right, by punishing the parent, right, we've actually protect the by supporting punishing the parent, we actually protect the free choice of these American citizens. We show that we do not stand for their negligence on bringing up the kid, right? Because the kid is not fully autonomous. He just follows his dad. If the dad is violent, the kid is going to be violent. Or more likely to be violent. By showing that we blame the parents, we actually show that the gun is not a problem. So because of this, we protect the people of America because they have the chance to protect themselves with their autonomy. And we'll explain why the NRA cares about this later. So on CD's unique exception, we are going to show you why the country is going to decline if we don't blame the parents, and why the NRA actually cares. So firstly, the reason that people blame the gun, currently in the status quo, people blame the gun, right? Their impression in status quo is that people see America with guns, and they go, oh, guns are bad, like, oh, why does America have guns? So they do not see the root cause of the problem, which is parents are not showing proper care and teaching their kids proper moral values, for like example, like not to resort to violence. So this is not good to the NRA's message because they actually want to show that guns are not just like a violent way to like resort to something, right? You can use it for like recreational stuff. So the whole country is eventually gonna like decline because of this, right? So we tell you that when the root cause is left unchecked, if only the children are to blame and not the parents, children are not going to be taught proper gun education because there's no proper nuance on the topic, right? So they just say, oh wow, these guns are bad, right? They don't actually give you like any proper reason as to actual reason as to why the child chooses to shoot in the first place. So guns are neutral, as Lee says, and they should be able to be used for self-defense, right? So children will not be, so on our side, right, children will not be taught to resort to violence so quickly because they have this option. However, their parents actually teach them not to go and like resort to violence so quickly, not to just shoot anyone that they want. So in the future generations, right, in opposition's world, if you do not like blame the parents are still just gonna like teach the kids the same thing, right? And in future generations are also going to become very violent, and they're gonna be like gung-ho, right? If they see something that they don't like, you're just gonna be like, oh, I'm just gonna shoot the person. So why does the NRA care? We tell you that it is in the NRA's best interest to ensure that the country remains non-violent, right? So why is this true? So if the NRA admits interference in the future and the country becomes non-violent, guns will become more common, but attacks will rarely happen. Right? So these guns will be used for their intended purposes, which is for like self-defense against the occasional assailant, and sports or like hunting. So because of this, there will actually be more gun rights because people are well educated on the topic of guns, right? They see that, oh, like guns aren't the like only reason people want to commit violence. They see guns in a more like positive light, right? So less violence means there's a lot of the backlash that the NRA gets is reduced, right? Because a lot of people have guns, but no violence happening. Outside countries, they see like, oh, there's so many guns in America, however, there's not a lot of violence happening. And because of this, size CJ.
Thank you, Member of God, for that speech. I'd like to call upon the Member of Law.
I will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, this debate operates in a vacuum of just the NRA and what it hopes to achieve. All pushes on how these laws are net positive to society do not matter. All pushes on how the children are not wrong and how the parents are complicit in this murder is wrong. CO are not against gun laws, but just think it's against the incentive of the NRAs. That's a very simple push. Gun back in this debate needed to prove to us, number one, why people within the NRA will support such a move, and number two, how it aligns with their goals of more gun ownership and less gun laws, right? CO will tell you two very simple things. Number one, how infighting within the NRA is likely to happen. Number two, on how the NRA is likely to face an inability to enact policy change they want to see in status quo, right? Take one line of technical call on OO, on how I really have no idea what the NRA actually loses out on from OO, because the opposition push in this needed to prove to us why it's against the incentives of the NRA. Very simple. Now, I think few responses. Number one, on how when you associate with violence, it means they have no support, right? I think for the purposes of the NRA, which I'll explain in my framing later, they do not need the buy-in of the neutrals and the masses, right? Because they have radical support, they have Republican Party support, and the NRA is catering to the radicals and status quo, and it does not matter what the neutrals think here. We also tell you that the NRA is already highly powerful in status quo because they get things like Republican support and radical support. Second, on how the NRA is likely to shift the problem away from guns and shift it to parents, right? So guns seem more palatable to people. I think it's very hard for people in status quo to actually believe that, because guns firing the bullet is very easy to understand. The bullet killed the kid. These are the direct links that people are likely to draw. It's very difficult to know that the parents were involved if you do not receive any nuanced information. Because when media reports on gun violence, a title like "Kid Building an AK-47 Killing 20 People" is 10 times more palatable than "Parent left the safe open and the kid went to take the thing," right? This is where they are crucially wrong here. Now, I think moving on to a few layers of framing that you crucially missed out here. Now, what does the NRA actually look like? I think all houses don't understand what the NRA is and the political capital they actually have already in status quo. We tell number one, they are led by paramilitary leaders or people that are generally radical in general, because it's natural to everybody that guns are bad, right? But they are led by paramilitary leaders. So we tell you the NRA is number one, largely radical, because even after shootings, they still support guns. They say it's not the guns' problem. They are likely to blame kids. They say, oh, this kid has mental health issues. This is the messaging that NRA is likely to use, and this is how they already push the blame away from guns. And this is easier to buy for people because it's a direct link. The kid held the gun shot the bullet. Okay. Second, we also tell you that Republican Party support. This is very important because this is where the masses of their support comes from. It's things like Trump supporting them in his rallies. They go to the NRA just to support them. This is where their political capital comes from. This is why it does not matter what the neutrals think about them. Whatever a random guy in the street has, it does not matter if Trump cares. Because Trump has two unique benefits and the Republican Party as a whole. Number one, political capital. Number two, financial capital. This is where they are able to get their policies through. This is where they are able to enact change, right? because Trump in general is already against gun control and the punishment as an extension. Now, we also tell you that the NRA is a main group for gun rights and they already have a large voter base because people in America believe in gun rights in general. Now, how does supporting punishment work, right? It looks like they are fighting for gun control because if you regulate anything related to guns, it directly goes against the agenda of the NRA because they are stopping the use of guns. And we can also tell you it's likely to cause dissatisfaction within the NRA because people join the NRA for more gun rights and they do not want the NRA, which is supposed to be our only protector, to storm them down. Now moving on to my arguments. Number one, on how it goes against the NRA's agenda. The reason is very simple because punishing is a total opposite of what they are supposed to do, which is to advocate for more gun rights, right? And it's not within the NRA's selfish incentives to push this. The impact is very simple, is that number one, you alienate supporters from the NRA because the NRA was there to protect gun rights. Secondly, you also lose donors and political capital because the politicians want to support you because they know that gun rights is a large voter base in America. When you change your stance, this is where donors lose out on your support. This is where Trump and the Republican Party do not want to support you. You lose out on political capital, you lose out on finances. The comparative is quite simple, right? On gun, you suddenly change your stance to support gun control and there is no powerful gun right lobbyists in status quo, right? Because now, gun control laws can actually pass and now you actually destroy the purpose of the NRA and the NRA is likely to dissolve as well because of the lack of supporters, because of the lack of political capital as well. On our side, it's very simple. The NRA continue fighting for what they truly believe in. This is the incentives of the NRA and the reason why they were formed. The bottom line is we don't care what happens. We only care about the selfish incentives of the NRA, which is likely to push gun laws. Yes, your point.
If all the capital is true, what is the infighting cause for saying parents don't control their guns around kids?
I think infighting within the NRA happens when you try to regulate gun laws, right? Because the people are inside for freedom for guns. When you regulate, this is when infighting happens, which ties me directly to the next argument, right? On how it's unlikely that this policy is palatable within the NRA to the upper echelon and also the people inside. Because you need to understand the NRA still operates on a hierarchy. Such policies will need to be pushed through multiple levels. The reason why it's not palatable is that people join the NRA for gun rights. You go against what the people want directly, and we tell every single person inside are gun owners, right? And by extension, they are most likely parents as well. These are the people who do not want to be punished by these laws. So when they feel that there's a proximate harm towards them, they are likely to be angry that the NRA is pushing for such a law, right? Second, the impacts are quite simple, that infighting, because not a majority of the people believe that such a policy should be passed, because yes, you acknowledge that gun violence is terrible, but you never think it's going to be my kid. So now when you feel personally attacked that the NRA is trying to block you, you're unlikely to be very happy about it. So we tell you, right? Secondly, when this infighting is likely to happen because people don't agree with your policies, you actually can't push for the things you're trying to push for cohesively. Because everybody is fighting about the internal things, there's no impact in status quo. The comparative on our side is quite simple, right? When you continue with your stance, you push for the same things you've been pushing for generations, it's that everybody is on board. You can actually fight for the things that the people inside want and what the NRA actually wants. You push for things that are actually better to the NRA. I think CO takes this debate very simply. We tell you the NRA is largely powerful. Any argument on messaging does not matter. We tell you anything about the kid being wrong, the parents being wrong, we do not care. The NRA is a selfish actor. We take this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of for your speech. I call upon Governor to raise here.
Am I audible at this volume? I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'll be taking down every single case stated by each side of the House today before providing how we mitigate our harms as well as a comparative world and a counterfactual on why we take this debate. I'll be starting with OO, okay? They simply assume that children do not learn from the environment they spend more than 18 years of their life in, while just assuming that parents have zero idea about the dangers of firearm misuse. I'll talk more about this later, but first I'll be addressing what the leader of opposition said, right? First he says there is a gun problem, and then after that he says that adults are not mature and therefore they do not have the mental mental capacity to actually educate the children on why it's not right to misuse firearms. And since they are held accountable, they hold kids accountable, which is incredibly shaky because you say that they are unable to think for themselves, and therefore we believe on CG that they do not have the mental capacity or development to actually know about what they're doing wrong unless the parents teach them what to do. Now the DL also says that parents have already done their best to educate the child, and it's not going to work no matter how much they continue to persevere to do so. Number one, they do not know how to prove this, and secondly, they also say that they are influenced by external sources, and they are influenced lesser by the parents and the environment that they actually grow up in, which is simply just a very shaky and uncharitable claim to make, because children, as my member of government has already stated, they tend to adopt what they see their parents doing, and they grow up in the environment for many years of their life, meaning that they are willing to adopt. Yeah.
What are your incentives for the NRA?
Yeah, I'll be getting to that later when I reverse CR, okay? But more on DLO, right? They say that, they talk about who better fulfills the incentives of the NRA, right? They say parents have no control over the child because they can't pay attention to every little thing that the child does. Number one, this essentially classifies guns and firearms in the house as little things, and it's such a big thing that parents have to pay attention to because it's such a dangerous thing if it falls into the wrong hands. And they also say that they will be stripped of firearms, meaning they do not obtain self-defense. However, we on CG are for gun ownership in the first place, and this does not mean that we are blaming the guns. We are blaming the parents that are held accountable for not teaching their children how to handle guns properly. Now on to CR, right? The member of opposition just keeps talking about what the NRA wants, what the incentives, all the financial and political capital they have, and how infighting occurs on their side because of the difference in agenda and incentives that they want in their side. However, number one, an NRA characterization and impact aside, yes, we concede with all the facts that they have brought out about the NRA. Number one, they do not address how the parents are actually affected in the situation where infighting occurs. And secondly, the main stakeholder in this debate is actually the children, and they do not address how infighting on the inside, which may cause the NRA to dissolve, actually affects the children on the outside because gun control is still regulated in the status quo. Now, no, thank you. Moving on to the comparative of this debate, right? In our world, we are providing a solution to an imminent harm that could spiral out of control if not handled properly or if uncontrolled. We are pushing forward a trend to punish parents that urges parents to actually realize the importance of educating their children about firearms in a more practical and principled solution instead of dealing with a more prominent one when it spirals out of control, right? We fulfill our burden as to how punishing parents actually deals with a much bigger problem now and why it's important in the future as well, as my member has already stated. In the counterfactual, even if they propose that guns are the issue, right, we have already stated how one, that is not likely to happen because of accessibility and the age of the child mentality, and secondly, the accountability factor of parents, because parents in our world, we have already stated and proven how they'll become more responsible if they realize the importance of dealing and educating their children about the misuse of firearms. Secondly, shooting cases are reduced on scale, and children actually know the dangers of how to deal with firearms if they are educated. CG fleshes out this debate more than OG as well to scale, and we prove why the NRA has incentives to play an integral role in maintaining the state of the country and the current status quo. So why do we win? There are a few weighing metrics for this. Number one, scale. US, realize this, right? US is one of the biggest countries in the world. It's not a doubt of the fact. So many people will be affected if no actions are taken to ensure the safety of the citizens, because these children are going to grow up thinking that, oh, since my parent has a revolver in his drawer or something, I'm just able to take it and use it however I want. It's better to enforce this trend of punishment now because it prevents the risk of it affecting more people in the future. And once again, I'd like to remind you all of the NRA's incentives. They want to dissuade misuse, not ban gun ownership, because it allows self-defense if taught properly. Number two, we talk about long-term effects, right? Let's take a look at each actor of this debate again. Once again, on guns world, if the NRA were to punish and actually teach parents and to show them the importance of why it's important to educate children on how to do not misuse guns, they will gain more capital for one, because more people will support them, and secondly, their reputation will be maintained if unlawful shooting cases decrease. For children, they will adopt a mentality that actually allows them to understand why misusing guns is wrong, and for the parents, they are realized as responsible figures, they are able to actually educate their children about why it's not right and why it's not principally correct to actually wield a firearm for your own personal incentives. There are many harms that are hard to reverse on opposition's world. However, we want for this trend of punishment because it prevents them, and also a more civilized world where children actually know how to use firearms for the right purposes and not for illegal methods. Thirdly, we take the principle side of this debate, right? For some contextualization, right? It's not principally or morally, right? If a child simply takes a gun because someone and shoots his friend just because that friend broke his box of Legos. It's the right thing to do if we teach the parents how to actually educate the children on what to use a gun for only self-defense purposes, and it prevents so many harms in the future as well. And involuntary manslaughter on site CG is actually still a crime as it is in the current status quo, and therefore realistically it's better to stop the problem now by teaching parents what is wrong and what is right. Therefore, we outweigh the harms in opposition's world, and therefore we take the clash between present harms about what happens to the NRA and the infighting and long-term ones, because we show you how if we don't enforce these punishments now, it will actually bring many more long-term disastrous harms for the country in the future as well. Realize that we are not blaming the NIA for advocating for firearms, right? That's why Type CG stance is to not talk about what the NIA wants, it's to cater more to the people on the ground, in this case the parents and the children. We are saying it's the parents that should be held accountable and responsible for how their kids are brought up. We support gun ownership, yes, not for misuse, but for self-defense purposes, which allows children to actually obtain a better grasp of what it's used for, as well as develop a country that actually has parents that know what they're doing and know how to educate their children, that makes a better future generation overall. We as ICG clearly take this debate as we once again provide a better counterfactual world as to why punishment is better. We ignore what the NRA's incentives are because we show you that we cater more to the parents and the people on the ground as well. Thank you.
Thank you to the government. To conclude the debate, I'd like to call upon opposition. Prepare here.
My speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Chair, us on CO are against punishing parents where children misuse firearms owned by them. And we tell you that gun control still happens on our side. Just we don't think it's appropriate that it is run by the NRA. It can be run by other things, but for the benefit of the NRA, we just don't think that it should be run by us. First of all, on some clashes. OG tell you they believe that punishing these parents or supporting punishing these parents will push them to put more efforts into containing the gun or controlling the guns that they have. All of the most things I've been seeing throughout this entire debate is that they just want parents to be more responsible. But we tell you we don't care, because in the NRA's benefit, what the parents do about their guns, we don't care about what the parents do about their guns. On our side, we clearly prove how we benefit the NRA more, because that's what's important to us in this debate. Not how the NRA consists of parents who could potentially be charged, and no way they support being charged. And although they know gun violence is bad, they will still think it will not be their kid shooting, as my first speaker has mentioned before. They will be angry at the NRA for potentially putting them in the crossfire, and they'll be angry because the NRA was supposed to protect them in the first place. Second of all, about messaging, they say that they want to follow the flow of the public generation's opinion and the general public's opinion, because they want to get more support, and they also say they want to bring the focus away from the use of guns, and that gun control activism in this way just like gives them more support on their side. But we tell you in the first place it's as well, the NRA negates involvement and often pushes the blame. And we also tell you that they have a lot of radical support already from this specific group of people, that no matter what we say, they will always be pro-gun. And we don't need the support of the general public, because the amount of people that already support guns is quite big enough for us to stay afloat by ourselves. And we also have Republican Party support. And so we don't need the support of the general public, and we don't need to follow the general public's opinion. Going over what my first speaker has said once again, we tell you that we tell you that punishing these parents goes against their agenda, and because it's a total opposite of what they do, and we are trying to advocate for the use of gun rights. So punishing these parents that make up a big part of make up a big part of NRA supporter actually is like going against what we already were trying to do, and it also alienates supporters, and you lose donors and political capital in the real world because you have like no power for politics. And if you suddenly change your stance, it will be really hard for you to keep your supporters, and it will just be really hard for you to have to keep this control of this power that you already had. And on our side, NRA continues fighting for what they truly believe in and what they've been fighting for the past multiple decades that they've been running. Second of all, we tell you that it's very unlikely to be palatable within the NRA because we tell you already that there is a hierarchy in the NRA, and these people that are in the NRA most likely are parents as well. And then people join because you're actively fighting for gun rights, and you go against what the people want. You go against what people in the NRA normally want, and then they don't want to be punished either. So this is why we tell you that this results in infighting, and you can't push for policies cohesively together because if only a few of you support this movement, there will be really low impact. So we tell you that on our side we'll be able to push for things that actually believe in better, which is the support for gun use. Okay. Rejected. Sort out to
Thank you everyone for the debate. You may now cross floor, shake hands, and make your way back down to the hall.